My name is Garrett Mason. I'm 52 years old, and until this morning, I was the senior site supervisor at Great Plains Construction in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I started in this line of work when I was barely 18, no college diploma, no management internship, just a strong back a clear eye and a stubborn commitment to doing the job right. After 34 years, I could hear a failing generator before it coughed. I could run my hand along a foundation wall and feel if it wasn't true. More than that, I knew when a site was headed for disaster long before anyone else noticed. And this morning, that knowledge got me fired. We need forward momentum, Garrett, not roadblocks, my boss, Trevor Marks said as he slid a termination letter across his polished oak desk. Roadblocks. Sir, that's what he called my repeated warnings about the understrength concrete on the Dakota Tower project. The same concrete that wouldn't hold up against a hard Dakota winter or an unexpected tremor. That's what he called my concerns about the missing rebar on the third floor. I didn't argue. Shucks, sir. Men like Trevor didn't expect quiet. They expected outrage, shouting threats, maybe even fists slamming the desk. That would have made it easier for them to paint me as the problem. Instead, I folded the letter with steady hands, slipped it into my coat pocket, and said, "I'll gather my things." "No need," Trevor said, nodding toward a cardboard box sitting by the door. "Security will escort you to your truck." Security. I picked up the box. It was light, suspiciously light, but I didn't open it. The security guard, a kid young enough to be my grandson, shifted awkwardly as he fell into step beside me. We crossed the site in silence. A few of the laborers paused to watch us pass, confusion plain on their faces. I gave a short nod, not goodbye, but something heavier, a warning, stay sharp. My truck sat on the edge of the lot, dust gathering on the windshield. I placed the box carefully on the passenger seat and took one last look back at the Dakota Tower skeleton rising into the gray sky. Corners had been cut. I knew it. Trevor knew it. Probably half the project managers in the office knew it too. But profits came first now, and the people who raised concerns like mine were obstacles to be removed. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Trevor talking to my replacement, a clean-cut man with a crisp vest and spotless boots. A man who I was certain had been hired to say yes to every reckless decision. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Beneath the box of personal items on my seat sat a thick folder, documentation, photos, emails, inspection notes, copies stored in the cloud and on a hard drive at home. I didn't know how or when I would use it yet, but after 34 years, I knew better than to let people who cut corners write the final story. Not this time. I drove straight home after leaving the Dakota Tower site, the cardboard box rattling softly on the passenger seat beside me. The house looked the same as it had that morning, the cracked sidewalk. The faded green shutters Elaine had been asking me to repaint, but something inside me had shifted. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a long while, staring at the worn welcome mat and the porch swaying gently in the breeze. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was steady focused. Inside, I set the box on the kitchen table and opened it for the first time. My thermos, a couple of worn site manuals, a framed picture of Elaine and me on our 25th anniversary. No sign of my tools. My good set Milwaukee Drills precision measuring gear, specialty wrenches I'd accumulated over 3 decades. Gone. At least $2,000 worth of equipment, and judging by the careful way the box was packed, missing on purpose. I pulled out a notebook and started a list item by item while the memory was still fresh. Then I picked up the phone and called Great Plains HR department. The woman who answered sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause. "Mr. Mason," she said carefully, per Mr. Marks's report, "your termination was due to insubordination and creating a disruptive work environment. As such, the company is not obligated to return company property." "My tools were bought with my own money," I replied. Keeping my voice even, "I have receipts. If they're not returned, I'll be filing a police report." Another uncomfortable pause. "I'll have to look into this." "I'll expect a call back," I said, and hung up before she could fumble through a polite excuse. I wasn't going to wait for them to do the right thing. Instead, I turned to my laptop and opened the folder I'd labeled months ago, Project Issues, Dakota Tower. Inside were photographs of improperly installed steel reinforcements, cracked welds, misaligned anchor bolts. There were scanned copies of emails I'd sent warning about these issues, most of them ignored or brushed aside by Trevor Marks and his team. There were even voice memos, quick recordings I'd made on my phone narrating what I saw on site in real time. Some people called it covering your ass. I called it survival. That afternoon, I opened a new email addressed to OSHA's regional office. In the subject line, I wrote urgent multiple safety violations at Dakota Tower Project. For the next 4 hours, I worked methodically attaching documents, cross-referencing photos with code requirements, noting dates, names, and exact locations, every claim backed by hard evidence. By the time Elaine walked through the door, I had just finished uploading the final files. She took one look at me at the organized chaos spread across the kitchen table and set her purse down slowly. "What happened, Garrett?" she asked. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty reassurances. When I finished, she stepped forward, placing her hands on my shoulders. "They're going to make this ugly," she said quietly. "I know. On. You might not find another job after this. I know Neri wanna so near." She gave a small smile, fierce and proud. "Then you do it anyway." I hit send on the email at 9:18 p.m., a quiet click that sounded louder than any argument I'd had on a job site. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for accountability. And I wasn't going to back down. By morning, the first shots had been fired. An email from Great Plains Legal Department landed in my inbox before I even finished my first cup of coffee. Carefully worded, but unmistakably threatening. "Cease and desist. Further defamatory statements or distribution of proprietary information may result in legal action." I reread it twice, the legalese thick and clumsy. The message was clear: back off or get buried. Elaine stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. "They're scared," she said simply. Maybe. Or maybe they were just good at bullying people into silence. Either way, I wasn't going to walk into this unprotected. I spent the rest of that morning contacting two people I trusted: Dan Rivers, an old construction lawyer who'd handled a wrongful termination case for a buddy of mine a few years back, and Jenna Ortega, a freelance compliance consultant who had once given a seminar on whistleblower protections. Dan returned my call first. "You didn't take anything off company servers, did you?" he asked after I gave him the broad strokes. "Nope," I said. "All my documentation was gathered off hours using my personal devices." "Good, that makes it a hell of a lot harder for them to paint you as a thief." He advised me to document every interaction moving forward: emails, phone calls, even voicemails. If anyone contacted me from Great Plains, I needed a clear record. "You're a threat to them now, Garrett," he said bluntly. "Not because you did anything wrong, but because you can prove they did." Next, I spoke to Jenna. She explained that under both federal OSHA regulations and South Dakota state laws, whistleblowers were protected from retaliation, at least in theory. In practice, she warned, they'll still try to crush you, blackball you from the industry if they can. You need to be ready for that. "I already am," I said, and I meant it. Armed with better advice, I created a secure digital archive that afternoon, cloud-based, encrypted, password protected. I made 3 separate copies, one for myself, one for Dan to hold, and one stored offline at a safe deposit box downtown. Next, I contacted OSHA's investigator assigned to my complaint, a woman named Maria Chin Sharp, direct, no nonsense. "I've reviewed your initial submission," she said. "It's thorough. We're prioritizing an unannounced inspection." When I asked, "Within the next 2 weeks, maybe sooner, depending on staffing," her voice hardened. "In the meantime, expect pressure. Companies often miraculously discover performance issues about whistleblowers when investigations start." "I'm ready," I said again. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the battered thermos I'd retrieved from my box of personal effects. Great Plains thought they could scare me with legal letters and thinly veiled threats. They thought they could erase 34 years of doing the right thing because it was inconvenient. But they didn't understand something fundamental about men like me. We don't fight with noise. We fight with proof, with patience, with the kind of quiet persistence that raises buildings and tears down lies. Elaine refilled my coffee mug and kissed the top of my head. "Whatever happens," she said, "you're doing the right thing." I smiled grimly. I knew that, but I also knew the fight was just beginning. It was 4 days after I filed the official complaint when I got the call from an old friend. "Garrett, it's Frank Sullivan," he said, his voice low, like he was checking over his shoulder. "Can you meet me?" Frank had been the electrical foreman on the Dakota Tower site, a man I'd worked with on and off for nearly 20 years. If Frank was reaching out now, it wasn't for small talk. We agreed to meet at a little diner on the outskirts of Sioux Falls, the kind of place where the coffee was bad, but the booths were private. Frank slid into the booth across from me, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, he pulled a small black flash drive from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. "I shouldn't have this," he said quietly. "But after you got canned, Donna from purchasing came to me. She's been keeping records too." I glanced at the flash drive but didn't touch it yet. "What kind of records?" Frank leaned in closer. "Testing reports, concrete batch failures, steel, certification, falsifications. Material spec sheets altered before submission to the inspectors. It's not just cutting corners anymore. Garrett, it's full-blown fraud." I felt my stomach tighten. I'd suspected as much, but suspicion and proof were two very different things. "How deep does it go?" I asked. Frank gave a humorless laugh. "Corporate deep purchasing, project management, even some people at city permits. It's all about pushing Riverview through fast enough to bid for that new hospital project. They can't afford delays or bad press." I stared at the flash drive, feeling the weight of it even before I picked it up. "Why are you doing this, Frank?" I asked finally. He shrugged. "Because someday my daughter might be working in one of those buildings. Because I was raised to know when something's wrong and not just walk away from it." We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken risks hanging between us. "They're going to figure out you leaked this," I said. He nodded. "Probably. But I've got some savings tucked away. Worst case, I'll find work out of state." He pushed the flash drive a little closer to me. "You're already out in the open. You're the best chance this stuff actually sees daylight." I slipped the flash drive into my jacket pocket without another word. When Frank left, he didn't look back. I paid for my untouched coffee and drove straight to the public library. No way I was opening that drive on my personal computer, not when I had every reason to expect Great Plains was monitoring me. In a quiet corner of the library, I plugged the drive into a public workstation and started scrolling through the files. It was worse than I expected. Dozens of falsified reports, memos instructing junior engineers to adjust numbers for compliance optics. Emails referencing, coordinating with city inspectors. An entire hidden side of the Dakota Tower project built on lies instead of steel. My hands curled into fists on the keyboard. This wasn't just Trevor Marks and his shortcuts. This was systemic, deliberate. And if I let it slide, I'd be complicit, even if I wasn't swinging a hammer on that site anymore. I logged off, pocketed the flash drive, and stepped back into the cold South Dakota wind. It was bigger than just one man's wrongful termination now. It was about the kind of city Sioux Falls would become, and whether men like Trevor got to build it with paper-thin promises and rotting foundations. Not while I still had a say. The call came the next morning, just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. "Garrett, this is Robert McKenna." The name stopped me cold. Robert had founded Great Plains Construction 40 years ago, back when it was a small outfit pouring sidewalks and framing houses across Sioux Falls. He had built it into a regional powerhouse by doing things right. Not fast, not flashy, right. He'd sold the company 5 years ago to a private equity group out of Minneapolis. That's when everything started sliding downhill. I heard about what happened at Dakota Tower. Robert said his voice was gravelly, slower than I remembered, but still carried weight. "We need to meet." We agreed to meet that afternoon at a park on the east side of town, a neutral spot away from prying eyes. Robert looked older, of course. Time had carved deep lines into his face, but his handshake was still firm, his gaze steady. "I want you to know something up front," he said once we found a quiet bench I didn't sell because I wanted to. "I sold because they boxed me out paperwork technicalities. They wanted the name, not the standards." I nodded. That much was clear. Robert leaned closer. "What's happening now? It's worse than I thought." I've been hearing whispers for months. City inspectors getting cozy. Safety standards quietly eroding. I thought maybe it was just sour grapes. "It's not," I said quietly. I told him everything, the falsified tests, the missing reinforcements. The flash drive full of damning evidence. His expression didn't change much, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. "I built that company with my bare hands," he said after a long moment. "It carried my name, my promise, even after I stepped away. I won't let them turn it into a death trap." He opened a worn leather folder and handed me a few sheets of paper bank records, internal memos. Copies of campaign contributions to city officials made suspiciously close to the Riverview project approvals. I still have friends in low places, Robert said with a thin smile. They passed this along after they heard about your complaint. I scanned the documents, feeling the pieces click together like steel plates bolted into place. Corruption, fraud, endangerment. This wasn't just a construction scandal anymore. It was a public safety crisis waiting to happen. I'll keep gathering. Robert said, you keep pushing OSHA. We come at them from both sides, corporate and regulatory. He stood slowly, gripping the back of the bench for balance. They think because we're old, we'll stay quiet, he said, his voice low and firm. They think experience is something you can throw away once you've squeezed it dry. I stood too, feeling a grim sense of solidarity settle between us. They're wrong, I said. We shook hands not as friends, not as employees or retirees, but as men who still believed that some things were worth protecting. Not for profit, not for pride, but because integrity once abandoned leaves nothing worth building at all. It didn't take long for word to leak. By the following Tuesday, I got a call from an unfamiliar number while I was patching the fence out back. Mr. Mason, this is Kelsey Hartman from the Sioux Falls Gazette. I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight, and your name came up. Would you be willing to talk? I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the fence post, weighing the question. I can confirm that I filed a formal complaint with OSHA, I said carefully. Beyond that, the investigation is ongoing. I can't comment further. It was enough. Kelsey picked up on the thread immediately. We've received anonymous tips suggesting falsified safety documentation at the Dakota Tower site. Can you point me to any public records that might support that? Check campaign contribution disclosures tied to the Riverview zoning approvals, I said, and look into recent safety inspection reports for inconsistencies. Nothing more, nothing less. By Thursday, the Gazette's article hit the front page. Whistleblower raises alarms over Dakota Tower construction. Sources cite falsified safety records, political ties. The article didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew the project would connect the dots. Trevor Marks issued a bland statement to the press about Great Plains' unwavering commitment to safety and transparency. City officials made similarly hollow noises about investigating any credible allegations. But the real effect rippled beneath the surface. That afternoon, Frank texted me, OSHA just showed up on site, surprise inspection, full team. I allowed myself a rare smile. Robert called me an hour later. The board at Great Plains is panicking. He said word is they're prepping to scapegoat Trevor and claim ignorance. I wasn't surprised. Corporate survival always demanded a sacrifice. What about the political side, I asked. Working on it, Robert replied. A few old friends in the State Ethics Commission are taking an interest. That night, Elaine and I sat at the kitchen table watching the local news cover the story. Footage showed OSHA inspectors walking the Dakota Tower site, hard hats gleaming under the gray afternoon sky. The anchor reported that materials samples were being collected for independent testing. That structural concerns had been raised not just internally, but now by federal regulators. They're not getting out of this clean, Elaine said quietly. No, I agreed, they're not. But I also knew it wasn't over yet. Great Plains would fight. Their lawyers would twist facts. They'd frame it as an isolated incident, blame a few individuals, and try to protect the company's larger interests. That's why Robert and I had agreed from the beginning it had to be airtight. Every document, every photo, every memo lined up, cross-referenced, undeniable. This wasn't about revenge anymore if it ever had been. It was about accountability, about making sure the next building that rose over this city wouldn't be a silent trap waiting to collapse. And as long as I had breath in my body, I wasn't going to let them cover it up. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later at the Minnehaha County Administrative Building. By the time I arrived, the hallway outside the meeting room was packed. Reporters, construction workers, city officials, even a few curious citizens who smelled blood in the water. I stood at the back unnoticed for now, my hands tucked into the pockets of my jacket. Beside me, Robert McKenna nodded, once his face carved into a mask of grim determination. At precisely 9 o'clock, the State Commissioner of Labor called the room to order. Cameras flashed as the panel of investigators took their seats. Thick binders stacked in front of them. Binders filled with evidence that Robert and I had worked months to gather. We are here today, the commissioner began to address serious allegations of safety violations, regulatory fraud. and misconduct related to the Dakota Tower project undertaken by Great Plains Construction. No one spoke. Even the reporters seemed to hold their breath. Trevor Marks sat stiffly at the defense table, flanked by two corporate attorneys. His face was pale but set in an expression of forced calm. Further down, Thomas Reed, the CEO of Great Plains, adjusted his tie nervously. The commissioner wasted no time. She listed violation after violation, improperly tested concrete, falsified safety certifications, altered inspection reports. She cited the campaign donations made just days before zoning approvals were rushed through. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She thanked the whistleblowers, plural, who had come forward. For the first time, Trevor's mask cracked. His eyes darted across the room, searching faces. When his gaze finally landed on me standing quietly in the back, I didn't look away. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was doing all the speaking now. After 2 hours of testimony, document reviews, and cross-examinations, the commissioner announced the findings. Immediate suspension of Great Plains' license to operate. Recommendation for criminal charges against Trevor Marks and 2 other executives. Referral of evidence to the state attorney general for further investigation into city corruption. The room erupted into a chorus of murmurs and shouted questions from reporters. Trevor tried to stand, but one of the attorneys pressed a hand to his shoulder, forcing him back down. Robert turned to me, a small, hard smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They're done," he said. I nodded once, not out of satisfaction, but out of relief. Not because I wanted to see anyone ruined, but because now, the building that rose in the heart of Sioux Falls wouldn't be a hidden graveyard waiting to happen. Justice, when it comes, is rarely clean or easy, but sometimes it's necessary, and today it had been delivered. 6 months after the hearing, I stood at the edge of a new construction site, hard hat tucked under my arm. Bridgeway Construction had offered me a senior superintendent position shortly after the dust settled. A smaller firm owned by people who still believed integrity was the foundation for everything we built. Today, we were breaking ground on a new community center on the north side of Sioux Falls, a project designed with purpose, not just profit. The morning sun gleamed off the freshly delivered steel beams, and I watched as the first crew arrived, their laughter cutting through the crisp autumn air. Frank Sullivan, my old foreman, climbed out of his pickup and gave me a thumbs up behind him. Donna from purchasing waved, clipboard in hand. We weren't just building a structure. We were building something we could all stand behind without shame. At lunch, I found a quiet spot under a young oak tree and unpacked my sandwich. As I ate, I thought about how much had changed. Driftline construction was gone. The Dakota Tower project had been demolished down to its foundations, deemed unsafe for occupation. Several former executives faced criminal penalties. A few city officials had resigned under investigation. But those weren't the victories I carried with me. What mattered more was what we had protected: the lives of the people who would have worked and lived in those buildings. The quiet truth that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything, still matters. Some days it's easier to look the other way, to convince yourself that someone else will step up, that it's not your problem. But every shortcut left unchallenged, every quiet compromise is a crack in the foundation of something bigger than a building. It's a crack in the trust we all depend on, the trust that someone somewhere still gives a damn about doing it right. As I sipped my coffee, Elaine texted me a photo of the new roof we'd finished on our house that summer. She'd captioned it simply, "Built to last." I smiled. I thought about the long nights spent wondering if I'd made the right decision, wondering if standing alone was worth it. Now I knew, because real success isn't about titles or paychecks. It's about the kind of legacy you leave behind. It's about knowing that when you had the chance to choose easy over right, you chose right. Not because it was rewarded, not because it was recognized, but because it was necessary. When the next generation walks into the buildings, we raise hospitals, schools, homes. They'll never know our names. They'll never know the battles fought in boardrooms and inspection offices. But they'll be safe. And that's enough. I tucked my hard hat under my arm and headed back to the site. There was work to be done. The right way. The only way that ever mattered.